Hey guys, my name is Dan and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be starting a new series looking at the history of the TOMIX Thomas & Friends line. A lot of fans call it the best model train product line that Thomas ever received, but unfortunately it was never released outside of Japan. The line is discontinued now, but you can still find it for sale secondhand online, and you can probably collect the whole series if your other hobby is real estate. Today we're going to be looking at the first item to be released in this line, but first let's look at a brief history of Thomas in Japan. While the UK and US were getting ready for Season 3, in 1990 Japan was introduced to Thomas for the first time on the show Hirake Ponkiki, which features my two best friends here, Gachipin and Mook.
機関車トーマスでしょ。さあ、どんなお話かな。楽しみですね。
It's kind of like how the US got Shining Time Station instead of just showing Thomas episodes by themselves, except this show already existed for a long time before Thomas, and it wasn't created specifically just to show Thomas like Shining Time Station was. In Japan, Thomas actually received full voice acting from the very beginning, featuring several talented voice actors you might recognize if you're a fucking dork. They even filmed a whole special with the Thomas models from the show, where Thomas meets Gachipin and Mook called Thomas and the UK Trip, which you may have heard of if you're a fucking dork of the Thomas the Tank Engine community variety. The TOMIX Thomas the Tank Engine line was first released in 1998, and unlike the HO scale Hornby and Bachmann lines we got in the UK and US, the TOMIX line was an N scale, which was a first for Thomas. Japanese houses are very small,
small, teeny weeny weeny.
So the most popular scale for model trains over there is N scale instead of HO scale. So it just made sense for one of the biggest model train manufacturers in Japan, TOMIX, to make an N scale Thomas line. Today we're going to be looking at the first Thomas model TOMIX released in 1998, the Thomas with Annie and Clarabelle set. They also released a full set including an oval of track and a transformer and everything, but today we're just going to be looking at the Thomas, Annie, and Clarabelle set. This is the box for the 1998 TOMIX Thomas with Annie and Clarabelle set. The box just screams classic, nostalgic Thomas in every way. It even has the old school Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends logo, along with the Britt Allcroft Company logo in the corner. Thomas, Annie, and Clarabelle are all shown from the side with their names printed on the box. Opening the box, we can see that the models are all protected in a case of styrofoam, which is much better than the crap Bachmann packages their models in. I have no idea what this product would have originally retailed for, but I found it at a secondhand model train shop in Japan for just 3,300 yen, which is only about $22. The yen is seriously struggling, man. Someone help. Now let's take a look at the model itself and see why so many people call it one of the best Thomas models ever made. First of all, the overall shape is completely perfect. The proportions are all right, which is something I can't say for literally any other models of Thomas out there. On the top of Thomas, we can see that the whistle is separately fitted, although it is painted yellow instead of gold. The cab is open, revealing the motor inside, but it's nice that light can go all the way through. On the side, the printing of the lining is pretty much perfect, aside from the paint being faded a little bit over time. One problem we can see is that the space above Thomas's splasher is molded solid and unpainted. This was done to leave space for the internal components, as this was 1998, so things couldn't get too small, but they could have at least painted it black. Looking at the bottom of the model, the wheels are spoked, but the axle in the center is left completely unpainted black. They could have easily painted over that with some blue. Also, the side rods completely lack any detail, which does stand out quite a bit. The back of the model doesn't have any lining, but it's fine because sometimes in the show he did have lining and sometimes he didn't have lining. I never really cared either way if models did or didn't have lining. The biggest lack of detail is actually at the front of the model. Thomas does have a lamp fitted, although he has no empty lamp irons. The vacuum pipes and dummy couplers are also missing, but this was to make space for the Rapido style N-scale couplers, so it's understandable. there wasn't really space to fit in a dummy coupler at the front. The backside does have a dummy coupler fitted, but still no vacuum pipe. I'm not too bothered by the lack of a coupler or vacuum pipe, but the front of Thomas does look very empty without the extra lamp irons. I feel like if they were going to include a separately fitted whistle, they also could have easily included some lamp irons. The face is alright, honestly. Not perfect, a little creepy, but at least it almost looks like one of Thomas's smiling expressions from the show, unlike the Bachmann HO model. I think the nose is just a little too small, and I think the printing on the eyes should have been a bit bigger. Now let's take a look at the inside of Thomas. It's very easy to open him up with just 2 screws and the whole body comes right off. There's a giant weight placed on top of the worm drive and another one behind the motor, which both give the model a lot of weight. The motor is also completely removable as it's only connected by these contacts, not screwed in or anything. Removing the motor gives us access to all the pickups, where we can see that the pickups are just wipers placed on top of the wheels, which isn't great because it means that as the wheels get dirty, they're also going to get the pickups dirty, which means you'll have to clean it more often than you would normal wiper pickups that are placed behind the wheels. Now I'd like to point out that there's actually 2 different versions of this model, with the latter one being released sometime around 2002-2003, I'm not sure exactly when. The later version has actually smaller screws at the bottom, and when you take those out, it actually takes off the base keeper plate at the bottom and reveals that the wheels actually have metal bearings on this one. I'm not sure if they have these metal brass bearings on the original version, but on this one we can see that there is clearly metal bearings. The body for this one actually doesn't come off with the screws, it's actually just clipped in there and you just have to pull it out to get the body off. It feels like you're gonna break it, but it's a pretty robust model, so it does just come off pretty easily. Inside we can see that the motor is actually completely reshapen. We don't see any more weights in here. Instead we have this giant motor casing where everything is on the inside and we can't see any of it. And actually there is a flywheel in there, and that is one of the main differences between this version and the original model, is that this one actually has a flywheel. As for distinguishing features on the outside, there's not that many, but if you look at the buffers, the new one actually has thicker buffers because those early buffers are actually very prone to falling off, and when you find the early version online, it will very often have the buffers missing, either from Thomas or the rolling stock, if it is these early versions of the buffers. We can see another difference between these models if we look at the wheels. On the new one, the inside of the axle is actually silver instead of black, which I don't really care either way, but between the spokes on the new model, there is actually some silver plate behind the wheel, so the spokes don't go all the way through, which is unfortunate. It was nice how they went all the way through on the original model, and that is not retained here on the second version. Also, the cab. Actually, on the newer model, the cab is completely open and you can see straight through it. You can see the motor if you look down, but just looking straight through the thing, you can't see the motor like you can on the old one, so that is also another nice upgrade. I would definitely recommend the newer one over the older one, because all of these upgrades really do help it to run a lot better, especially the flywheel, and I think the pickups were probably changed on the new one too, because I can't see where those on top of the wheel wiper pickups would be on the new one. I think it's either axle pickups or wiper pickups behind the wheels. One last thing I want to point out about this model is that although they do run on N-scale track, they are not actually N-scale. As you can see here with a regular N-scale model, Thomas is just huge. And it's not just the difference between British and Japanese N-scale either. As you can see here, Thomas even looks massive next to this Japanese diesel model. The Thomas items are all in scale with each other, but do be aware that they won't fit in with any other models you may have, including the Bachmann Thomas line. Next, let's take a look at Annie and Clarabelle, which are actually distinct models. Yeah, unlike every other model I've ever seen of these two, Clarabelle's luggage compartment is actually modeled here. The livery used here is their pre-Season 5 livery to give it that classic Season 1 to 4 feel, and the faces are all the same faces you'd see on basically every model of them ever produced. Annie is shocked, and Clarabelle is happy. The sides don't feature any extra paint on the details, but I think that's fine because the molding is all there. One issue I do have is that the wheels are made out of plastic. The axles are metal, luckily, but the wheels themselves being plastic is an unfortunate bit of low quality from this model. Unlike Thomas, Annie and Clarabelle are not easy to open up, as the roof and windows are just pressure fitted, so it really feels like you're going to break them when you're trying to get them open. But once you do get them open, you can find that there's no interior detail. Honestly, at this scale, I don't really think that's a big deal at all. I mean, who was expecting interior detail inside of an N-scale Annie and Clarabelle? If you release these clips on the inside, you can find that the chassis is holding another big weight. This might seem like a bad thing because it would make the models heavier and harder to pull, but Thomas almost never runs Annie and Clarabelle with any other rolling stock, so weight isn't really an issue here, since the train isn't going to get any longer than just these two. If you bought a lot of these to make a rake of Season 1 style coaches, I would consider removing the weights though. The weight being there does also help to prevent them from derailing, which is a good way to counterbalance the plastic wheels, although I think the expense would have been better spent just giving them metal wheels in the first place rather than a big metal weight that doesn't really add anything to the model. Well, now that we looked at the models close up, let's go ahead and see how they run. I'm not going to talk at length about the actual running quality of these models, like the slow speed and all that, because some of these models are over 25 years old now, and the quality between different examples of the model may vary wildly. I will say that mine barely ran at all until I opened it up and cleaned the pickups, so if you do pick up one of these, be sure to do that first thing before running it. Here I'm actually running the updated version that I have because the older one does stutter sometimes and the newer one just runs better overall, having the flywheel and the presumably better pickups and everything. If you're going to pick one of these up, I would definitely suggest to go for the newer one. The best way that you can tell is to just look at the buffers, and if they're fat buffers, it's the new one. If they're skinny buffers, it's the old one. There is also a CGI updated version with a CGI face, which is just the same as the later version, so if you're okay with the CGI face, then you know that you can also pick that one up as well. The main question of this video is this really the best Thomas model ever made? I can say for certain that when it was released in 1998, that was definitely true. Looking at everything else that was out at the time, this was the best Thomas model. Better than the Hornby ones that were out, better than the Bachmann ones that would be out shortly thereafter. But as for now, well, there's a couple other contenders. There's of course the Cool Props Thomas, but if we look at direct competitors, Bachmann has actually released an N-scale Thomas as of a few years ago. But is it better or worse than this one? I think that's a video topic all on its own, but what I can say is that this is a fantastic model. It's certainly worth the $20 that I paid for it, and if you can find it, I'd say it's worth not paying over $100 for this set, although I think even that's a bit of a high price for this. These are really not hard to find at all. You can find them for under $100, even closer to $50 pretty often if you're looking for them. It's Thomas, so it's obviously the most common item in the whole series. Well, that's going to be about it for today's video. Please let me know what you think in the comments. I'm open to any feedback on how I could improve these videos. So anyways guys, thank you all for watching. Be sure to comment, like, subscribe, rate, favorite, share, +1, anything else you can do on YouTube, and I will see you later.